Executive Director here at AWA. Thank you for joining us on this lovely evening. It's a really special event for us. So I would like to invite Nathan Schmidt, who's on our board of directors, but he's also the chair of the audits committee, to come and he'll introduce our speaker for this evening. Nathan?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Nathan. I am the chair of the Audits Committee, and so we work throughout the year to choose who to recognize as people who go above and beyond protecting and across the country. So before I get to that, I will give the land acknowledgement that is part of every event we do here. So in the spirit of respect, reciprocity, it's true we are consists of the traditional treaty setting territory and role practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika and the Yahe Nakota and Tsuut'ina nations. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3 within the historical Northwest Métis movement. And we also acknowledge that Indigenous and non-Indigenous people who live, work, and play on this land and who honor and celebrate this territory. It's something that I picked up from doing and hearing the land acknowledgements is making it personal instead of just reading the script. So for me, as part of my day job, I go out onto various reserves around Calgary and the surrounding areas, including Edith Valley and beneath me, which was formerly Morley, and work with people who live on those reserves and see how they are reconnecting with the land around them and reconnecting with their communities to improve their communities through pretty notable efforts. So it's something that I find very interesting to see and powerful to see as they work through some of the difficulties they face there and reconnect with very beautiful places. So that's my personal aspect of the land acknowledgement from those who live around us. So for tonight, we are honoring as this year's Alberta Wilderness Defender, Clint Docken, who I've known for the entire time that I've been with Alberta Wilderness Association volunteers from 2018 and a board member since 2020, approximately. So Clint has been a Calgary-based lawyer for over 50 years and instrumental in many significant environmental law cases in Canada, including being legal counsel to the Fort McMurray First Nation's class action lawsuit against the coal company that spilled 670 million liters of wastewater into the Athabasca River in 2013, and some cases that community use is just told me to be working on. I won't spoil the surprising case. He's also a long time Bragg Creek resident, and he's been involved in the environmental community and activities there since 1974. For me personally, since the time I've joined AWA and joined the board, I started law school, finished law school, so I've looked up to him personally as a lawyer who has done more than just be a lawyer, that's contributed and given back to his community here and used his skills to make improvements to the environment. So I think it's very fitting that we are acknowledging Clint tonight and hear about his experiences and be inspired by what he has to tell us. So with that, I will hand the floor over to Clint. And oh yes, and that you can give him the award. It's my first year on the committee, so they gave you the chair right away. So there it is right there. He will join the others on the wall. And hopefully we get to hear a little bit about the nature of the picture down there. And we got like also present things. Thank you.
So thank you, Nathan, for those kind words. So it's my great honor to be the recipient of this award. I actually knew Martha and worked with her on certain issues, and she was quite a legend in terms of the environmental community. I apologize, I'm a bit of a newbie. I think I've only been an AW member for about 50 years. I understand the organization's been around a little longer than that, maybe Clint is. Septuagenarian member or whatever. Anyway, special welcome out to my family members, my wife Julie, my son Spencer, my sister Gail, her husband Mitch, my Article student Kostuch, who I'm sure I will entice to getting involved in some of these campaigns, and a good friend of mine, Doug Weston, who actually took this picture, and we'll talk a little about our wonderful adventure on Pico de Orizaba in Mexico. And Doug and I have had a number of adventures over the years, including looking for lost planes in the mountains. And hopefully my message tonight is that I want to encourage people in terms of participation. I want to talk about some success stories and hopefully leave you with some positive thoughts in terms of environmental issues in these very challenging times. And some of you may ever know Mike Sawyer. Remember Mike Sawyer? Mike was quite an activist and kind of a sad story. Another good friend of mine who's a legend lives in Bragg Creek is Doug Ward. Doug has done the first ski descents on a number of mountains. And anyway, he tells a story about Mike. He and Mike were looking at the first descent of Mount Robson, and it wasn't going to work out. They brought in the helicopter, and Mike was waiting for the helicopter, and unfortunately his arm got taken off by the helicopter. And anyway, on the way out, Doug tells a story that he had to keep positive in terms of what had happened to Mike, because at that point he thought his career was over because he was going to be an environmentalist. And anyway, Mike survived and went on, and I worked with Mike. And I remember one time he was in our living room and we were talking strategy, and he said, Clint, really the only message that authorities recognize is a good lawsuit. And that's stuck with me, and we had some success, and I'll talk about that. So in terms of my interest in the environment, just turn to the next slide then. Our family grew up in Toronto, and we grew up on a ravine in North Toronto, and kind of lived in nature. There was a creek, and we used to collect crayfish in the creek, and it had a particular attraction to trees. In particular, one tree, it was a large basswood tree. And if any of you know basswood trees, they're absolutely huge, and they grow forever. I used to climb in that pretty regularly until I fell off one time, broke my arm. But anyway, that was my introduction to trees. And in terms of rivers, I think my closest connection with rivers was during my university years, and I got into river racing, canoe racing. And I remember one time my good friend of mine, Dick Schwann, and I decided we were going to do the Lumsden to Craven Coquille River Voyager canoe race. Has anyone been in that, or you've heard about it? Now we decided, because it was a Voyager race, we're going to do it up properly, and we're going to go in costume. So we went as Radisson and Groseilliers. And of course, we had to have the furs and the fur hats and everything. Well, it turned out to be an exceptionally hot day. It didn't turn that well in terms of the race. Anyway, I felt I was going to make up for that. So I was at university. And a friend of mine and I were in charge of the intramural canoe racing on the Saskatchewan River. And this time, we're going to make a difference. So I was able to borrow the Voyager canoe from the museum, which was a classic, 10-person canoe. So, I got 10 great paddlers and I got a bagpiper, who's going to inspire us. And, we actually didn't do that well either. But maybe a few drinks before the race. And then my attraction, I think, to wildlife to a certain extent was driven by a couple of close encounters with bears. And some of you may have had close encounters with bears. These were particularly close. I remember one time we were driving out to Radium and we stopped at a picnic area and there was a bear in the picnic area. So we figured we'll stop in the car and see what happens. Well, the bear came back, got up on all fours and just pounced on the windshield. And there I was, nose to nose with the bear, which is kind of an interesting experience. Yeah, the other close encounter, I was working one summer as the recreation coordinator for the Saskatchewan Provincial Park System. And we're opening up a new interpretive center at Madge Lake. If anyone's been to Madge Lake, there you go. And that's bear country. And we had a superintendent with a little different approach to things. He wanted to make sure we had a big media splash. So he caged the bear in advance of opening the interpretive center. And anyway, the bear was released. The bear had been in the cage for a couple of years because he wanted to make sure he caught him. Not a couple of days. Anyway, the bear was released coincidental with my cutting the ribbon to open the interpretive center. Needless to say, the bear had a very close encounter with everybody, and it was quite the media event. So I guess it had the desired effects. Anyway, that's some of the background that got me introduced to the environment. When I moved to Calgary, I lived in Calgary for about a year, and then I decided I wanted to live in the country. So ended up moving to Bragg Creek. And Bragg Creek was an interesting community at that time. I've lived there ever since. And first introduction, I think, to my environmental campaign. Some of you may know or have heard of Ron Wallace. Ron was the one that was involved in the coal inquiry. And in any event, Ron at that time lived in Bragg Creek, and he said, Clint, we got this Husky Moose Mountain hearing coming up in front of the regulator. They want to drill on Moose Mountain. And you should organize an environmental organization and get standing. And we did. So organized BCEC, or the Bragg Creek Environmental Coalition. And we got into this hearing, and this was my first introduction to the regulatory process. And I was there. There was a representative from Greenpeace, and then there was a representative, a lawyer, who was acting for the Tsuut'ina Band. And it was kind of interesting getting into it. Husky was going to do the right thing. They went out, they did an exhaustive archaeological study that cost them tens of thousands of dollars, because they wanted to make sure that there weren't any particular artifacts that they were going to be disturbing in terms of this drilling program. And over the course of about a year study, they came up with one single archaeological artifact. And it was a rusty tin can that they pulled out of an old campfire. That was the extent of it, which was kind of surprising. I think everyone was thinking there'd be a lot more. But it was an interesting process. The Tsuut'ina Band was represented, and Husky had done everything in terms of making sure that they were going to be friends in terms of the process. And after Husky had done all this good work, the band advised them that, well, it really wasn't our traditional territory. You're going to have to go back and do all the same work with the Stony Band. Which they did. That was interesting too, because the Stony Band said, we've got no particular interest in Moose Mountain. It's always been very sacred to us, but we were never there because of its sacred quality. But anyway, we went in and we had some interesting experts in the community dealing with drilling procedures. And, you know, Husky wanted to go in and they were going to carve a big road up Canyon Creek and make an awful mess. We actually convinced them that they could, you know, directionally drill from an existing site to where they wanted to be. And that's ultimately what happened. And you know, you can hike into up Canyon Creek now, and you're not on a road that would have had a significant impact. So that was one of the first forays. Interestingly enough, another foray, the BCC decided that they were going to deal with the range improvement program. Back then, there was a range improvement program, and ranchers could go out and cut down great swaths of crown land on which they had leases for grazing. And you know, BCC took exception to that because there wasn't a lot of thought that had gone into the program, and everyone got sued. And the entire board, and I remember, you know, Carl Kostuch said, I don't know why they sued me. All I do is put up chairs for the meeting. And then we had a young, I think she was 16 at the time. We had a young director, and anyway, I was speaking to her father about all of this, and you know, concerned. I mean, that's pretty young to get sued. And he said, no, that's great. It's going to build character. And anyway, it all went away because it was a SLAP suit. If you know about SLAP suits, you know, strategic litigation against public participation. It all went away. So you know, we all got sued, but it was a good experience, and it built some character. One of the earlier experiences at the time was, does everyone remember Fred Fraser and the blockade? Okay, it was a while ago. Anyway, Fred Fraser had been thrown off the Tsuut'ina Reserve because he didn't have any Tsuut'ina blood. Anyway, he didn't take that very well, and he decided he was going to establish his own reserve in West Bragg Creek on behalf of the Uterus band. He established a new Indian band. So he set up a blockade, and you couldn't get in to West Bragg Creek unless you signed this petition. This petition to the government was to give you a home where the buffalo don't roam on the Tsuut'ina Reserve. And he was there for some time, and it started to cause some problems. And my neighbor, Doug Clancy, he was quite an avid mountain biker, and he made the mistake when he was out mountain biking. He went in the back ways, away from the blockade and the encampment, and he made the mistake of coming out through the encampment. And he was chased by blockade members with spears and clubs, and it was quite a traumatic experience. So things like that were happening, and you know, Fred and his gang were in there, and they were cutting trees, and they were shooting a lot of the local wildlife. I drove in one time with a friend of mine, and we approached the blockade, and for whatever reason, they let us through. So figure we're fine. So we drove through to Moose Mountain. We're going to go hiking up Moose Mountain, and anyway, we finished our run and came back, and the group had felled a tree across the path because we're in their territory. But luckily, he had a winch and we were able to get out. And then finally, the last incident, a fellow by the name of John Connolly. I don't know if any of you dealt with John. John was quite a legend in Bragg Creek, and you know, he came out of the Napa Valley. At one point, he owned most of 17th Avenue. He was quite a real estate developer, but he was a maxillofacial reconstruction expert. You know, if you were in an accident and you lost your face, he would reconstruct it. Big strapping guy. And anyway, he and I eventually got involved in the first round of logging in Bragg Creek, but he had enough with the blockade. And when John was on a mission, he was on a mission. So he called me up and he said, Clint, we're gonna go run the blockade. And he had this old truck, this old beat up truck, and he says, I don't care if we come back with any sort of a truck. We're gonna So anyway, here we are driving towards the blockade. I can see my light flashing. And in front of me, we get to the blockade and darn it, they don't wave us through. John was so disappointed. He went back and he tried to pick a fight with the group, and there was none of that happening. But anyway, shortly after moving to Bragg Creek, all of a sudden there was this logging operation. And there hadn't been commercial logging in Bragg Creek really ever. There was the Fullerton Post and Pole company, which would take the log out, for posts and poles. But anyway, Spray Lake had moved in and there wasn't any public consultation. This didn't seem right. So we decided we were going to sue. So we fired up a claim. And at that time, we actually had quite an understanding deputy minister in the department, a fellow named Fred McDougall. And I think Fred's still around and active perhaps in the AWA. And Fred said, this isn't right. And he issued a directive and he said, there ain't going to be any logging here until there's a full and fulsome, discussion and consultation with the community. Still have that letter on record. And we had that. And we had a forest manager from Spray Lake that was quite enlightened. We had a forestry representative that was quite enlightened. We went through and we did a cut block by cut block analysis. And the whole idea, which we accomplished, is okay, we want a logging operation here, and if people are driving west and into the West Bragg Creek parking lot, they shouldn't be aware that this area is ever blocked. And we accomplished that. And we actually, the department had a landscape architect, and he would come in and he would do visuals on each and every cut. And whenever there was an issue on a cut block, Spray said, that's fine, we'll just take that out because we'll make it up somewhere else. And that was a model process that hasn't been duplicated since. And it's been, nothing but strife in terms of West Bragg Creek ever since. But everything went well. There was one glitch. Spray actually, if anyone's been on the telephone trail, West Bragg Creek, Spray had their logging road was a little wider than what was prescribed. And, forestry time said that's not right. They've broken the rules. They're going to pay the price. And they were charged and fined. And, as I say, I'll talk about, this is Spray round one. We've got about 6. and you'll see it's never been like that. So Spray round 2. Okay. So they were in, and this was in the 1980s, and it was particularly irksome to our family because we had a young child at the time, and the logging trucks would come out of West Bragg Creek and up Range Road 54, and we get the lights from the trucks in our bed. So and they were using the West Bragg Creek as a hauler, and they made the mistake of unfortunately killing one of our neighbor's horses. Jeez. But I can't imagine I've ever seen a horse of that value, and the value paid as a result of our litigation. So anyway, we thought that would be a bit of a lesson. But anyway, Spray comes back. It's the second round. Virtually no consultation. So anyway, in Bragg Creek, we rallied the troops. We filled the Bragg Creek Hall. There was hundreds and hundreds of people administering, and it was thoroughly vilified. And apparently went away and went to the department and said, fix this. Do whatever the community wants. And there was a discussion, and there were about 20 different issues in terms of 20 different cut blocks. And in each of those 20, spray wasn't prepared to do anything. And in each and every case, forestry indicated they had to do whatever we wanted. So that was a situation where you had the whole community galvanized, and it had the desired effect. So round 3. This was kind of interesting. I mentioned that, the problems associated with the West Bragg Creek Hall, the spray lakes. And they had committed in terms of this round of logging that they weren't going to use the West Bragg Creek Hall. So anyway, I'm driving home towards Bragg Creek one night, and there's a large flatbed truck with a very large piece of equipment on it. And it caught my attention because it was covered in mud, and the lights and the license plate were covered. So I figured, well, I'm going to follow that truck, see what they're up to. The darn if the truck didn't turn off and onto the West Bragg Creek. So my assumption, and it was a correct assumption, is, this is one of Spray's contractors, and he shouldn't be here. And I wasn't going to let that go. So anyway, at the right point, I pulled across the path of this logging truck and stopped him and initiated a citizen's arrest. And I was fairly confident because it wasn't my first citizen's arrest. And it was effective. And anyway, I called the police. But at that point, reality set in, because here I was, alone in the bush, with an irate logging, contractor, unarmed. What do I do? So I called my good friend and neighbor, Eric Lloyd, some of you may know Eric, for backup. And that gave me the confidence to proceed, complete the citizen's arrest. The police came out, forced the truck to turn around. Spray wasn't particularly happy over any of that. But it was interesting because the police officer approached me after the truck had left and he said, Mr. Docken, appreciate what you've done. It was probably the right thing to do, but there's something you should understand is you can't affect the citizen's arrest for anything other than someone committing an indictable offense. And I don't think that offense was quite indictable. So that's round 3. Round 4. Where the smoke, there's fire. Okay, so spray is in. They completed their second round of logging. And they've got to clean up. So they promised us they're going to bring in these high-priced incinerators to burn the slash. So that worked for the first year, and then they realized that was too expensive. So let's go back to the old style of brush piles, which is burn. And it caused some problems in the neighborhood, with the westerly flow, the smoke would come from the burn piles. And, end up in our garage and other places. So we weren't going to let this happen. So we filed a class action for nuisance. And anyway, we got into examination. We were examining some of the forestry officials involved in the operation. And the one individual admitted that there were criteria. They only burned when the weather was below a certain temperature, and they only burned when there wasn't a westerly flow. So I remember examining him, and he said, I asked him, did you meet the criteria in terms of temperature? And he debated for a while, and he said, well, no, I guess it was a little warmer than it should have been. And what about the westerly flow? And he said, no, it wasn't a westerly flow. It was was blowing to the east. So anyway, I had the opportunity of examining his manager after that. And he confirmed, no, they shouldn't have been burning because the temperature wasn't right, and no, they shouldn't have been, burned because of the westerly flow. And I was out later that day to shut it down. And anyway, we resolved that, and it was a wonderful resolution, Paul. I mean, one of the benefits of class proceedings is behavior modification. And as a result of that, the department changed their entire procedures in terms of burning slash and notice to communities and volunteered to do that. So I mean, it was a great result. And I think that's an example of how you can affect behavior modification, even if nothing else in terms of the class action process. Okay, so round 5. I happen to chair our local fire smart team, and for a number of years, and the process went on for an extended period of time, and we realized pretty early in the process is the department was going to try to justify fire smarting to support a logging program in West Bragg Creek. And they brought in an expert, and we had all kinds of meetings and all kinds of studies, and we got into a Prometheus model, which gauges wind flows and all of that sort of thing. And anyway, we were reasonably convinced, that well, maybe there's some utility in the odd fire rate here in Bragg Creek. And we were working towards that, and then I asked the expert. I said, okay, some of this makes sense. Are you saying then that maybe we can do some planning here and we'll have some fire breaks? And he paused for a minute and he says, I don't think I'd ever put a firefighting crew into that, in that circumstance. So it was all a ruse. It was just a complete ruse. And you'll notice today that the Greater Bragg Creek Fire Strategy does not include provision for vegetation management that they wanted. So, another example, I think, of a success story. Okay, that takes us to round 6. Spray round 6. Has anyone been in the Mustang Hills? Lovely spot. Wild Mustangs. It's if you've been west of Bragg Creek beyond Elbow Falls, you get into the Mustang Hills on the south side of the road before you get to
Ranger Summit.
Pond.
Oh, Ranger Summit,
Yeah, beyond Ranger Summit.
not that.
And there was a plan to log there. It was one of the few remaining areas that the spray was interested in at the time. And it didn't make a lot of sense for a lot of areas, a lot of reasons. So okay, once again, we sued. We sued on the basis of the lack of consultation. And right on the eve of the hearing, the powers that be came to us and agreed to make some pretty dramatic changes in terms of their cutting program. And if you've been there, and I think if you weren't aware that there had been logging, you may not be aware of that fact. So that was another success story. It was driven by litigation, and in any event, there were changes made. So okay, that takes us to round 7. And this wasn't quite as successful, but Spray Lake at the time, it's now West Fraser, but Spray Lake at the time owns a good part of downtown Calgary. It's not just the mill, but it's quite a large area to the east of the mill. And for whatever reason, they had been paying a stipend of what they should have been paying in terms of tax. And some of you may know Heinz Zahn, a longtime AWA member. This wasn't sitting well with Heinz because he kind of lives, well, he lives close to Calgary. So anyway, we challenged their assessment and got a very favorable hearing in front of the assessment appeal board, and they said, you know, we would have found for you, but for the fact that there's no current assessment information, so we don't know how much more Spray should be paying. Now, I don't know what's happened since, and there may be changes with the change of ownership, but that's yet another front where we're taking on Spray Lake. I didn't have a lot of friends at Spray Lake. Okay, I'll talk about a couple success stories in terms of you know, the failure to consult. We've talked about that. The Barcy Ranch at the time, I don't know if it still exists, but it's up the Forestry Trunk Road past Wipers. And at the time, there were some logging operations planned in the area. And, you know, at the time, it was a dude ranch. And these were areas where they would take tourists. And they were upset over what was happening. So, you know, we fired up a claim, once again, on the failure to consult. Got a number of injunctions. We were successful on any number of legal counts right through our Court of Appeal. But the case itself is now a classic case and a pivotal case in terms of the duty to consult. And this is a quote from the case, from the judge. You know, in situations where there's a legitimate difference of view, as there is here, the decision maker must surely do more than simply let the loggers and their consultants gather all the information from the safety of an SRD office, review the material and make the decision. And to this day, it's you know, a classic case in terms of the duty to consult. And that's where you can have success in terms of some of these campaigns. The next case is the soldier case. And this, you know, Ken Soldier, a Stony Bend member, and there was logging planned in the civil area. And that was an area where, you know, he would collect herbs and berries. And this was going to impact his you know, traditional use. So we fired up a claim. And in terms of the court decision, the court agreed with us that there was clearly a duty to consult. They found, though, that it was a collective right for the band in that circumstance. It wasn't an individual right. But another example where there was success in terms of the issue of consultation with the courts. Okay, a few more campaigns here. Castle coup. A number of you may remember the original plan for logging in the castle and the blockade, and you know, a number of prominent Albertans involved in the blockade. And anyway, the government stepped in and decided they were going to lay contempt charges because there had been injunctions in place, and that they didn't like this sort of an insurrection. So I ended up acting for a number of the protesters, and we were able to make all of the charges go away. So I think one of the messages is, you know, in terms of getting active, you know, what's the risk, and it's pretty minimal. Another, you know, I wasn't involved in this campaign, but a very successful campaign. The Brooks Motocross Club had an event down on Racehorse Creek. They didn't know what they're supposed to do in terms of building bridges. and there was a fish kill, and it was a prosecution, and in that case, the fine was $45,000 for the club and $25,000 for the executive director. So that's an example of how you can get involved and have some success. Okay, the gold calamity, the Obed mine, arguably the largest coal slurry spill of its kind, close to Mount Polly. And it was a dam that broke, slurry spilled into Bragg Creek and ultimately into the Athabasca River. And the effect was significant because it affected every user of water right from that point through to the Delta. So, I mean, all of these farms and ranchers that were relying on water out of the river couldn't for a period of time. Municipalities, they weren't able to access their water treatment. Significant impact. And when I heard about this, I just felt we needed to do something. And worked hard, interesting enough, had discussions with the Friends of the Athabasca, who I thought would be quite keen in getting involved, but they weren't. There wasn't any response from any of the municipalities along the route, but luckily a friend of mine had a connection with the Fort McMurray First Nation. And in that case, Sheriff had paid a lot of fines. The regulator had done the job and they paid a lot of fines, but we didn't think that they'd done enough. So we filed a class action on behalf of the band. We ended up with quite an attractive settlement ultimately. Phillips the benefit of some of that. We ended up getting funds for monitoring fish. We ended up getting funds for the band in terms of training for environmental monitoring. And as I say, it was only the involvement of that particular First Nation that made it happen. Okay, the coal calamity, and we're still living through this. So a bit of background: 1976, Peter Lougheed put into place the coal strategy. The coal strategy put some pretty serious limitations in terms of coal mining of eastern slopes. And Robin Campbell, the former environment minister, who now is probably still with the Coal Association, managed to effectively lobby the government to get rid of the policy and to essentially make things wide open. And a lot of activity at the time, thanks to the good efforts of a number of AWE members, Cliff and Richard, in terms of the Grassy Mountain hearing. That got shut down, but all of that was at risk because of this reversal of the coal strategy. So we worked, the AWA worked collectively with the Livingston Landowners Group. It was an interesting group. We actually put on a benefit concert, and we got Port Blunt to participate in that and raise some funds. And we had success on the litigation front, and they reversed the reversal. But we're still there in terms of that. We need to be diligent going forward. So, what are the costs of all of this? And this is kind of interesting because in terms of all of the litigation and the exposure to court costs over some 50 years in terms of my experience, not only has there not been a single time where we have had to pay any adverse costs, and in a number of situations, we've recovered costs. We recovered our costs way back when on the Husky Woods Mountain hearing. We recovered our costs on Bar C, full cost. You know, we recovered our costs, the full costs on our COVID. So, you know, there's a perception that, you know, you have to be mindful of litigation because you can be faced with all of these adverse costs of it. In my experience, it hasn't happened. And in fact, the opposite has happened. And I remember one time we took the city on a tax issue in terms of the assessment on this building. And we weren't able to convince the judge of our cause, but at the end of it, I recall the judge, you know, turning to the city's counsel and saying, you know, Mr. Brown, you realize you're dealing with a not-for-profit group here. You're not asking for costs. Or she could, you know, but that's sort of definition. So, in conclusion, my recommendations, one thing to be mindful of, and it's something you can do quite easily, and it would have alerted us to the whole situation, is to check the government of Alberta lobbyist registration. Because lobbyists are required to register who they're talking to and about them. And it was all there with Mr. Campbell and his lobby before the claimant goal strategy. It seems as though the UCP government relies heavily on lobbyists in terms of their legislative platform. So that will give you a sense of what's going on. And I recall one time I checked in, and it was interesting because the casino owners were lobbying to recover the entire profits from all the provincial casinos at the expense of nonprofits. So there's that sort of activity going on, and we need to be, you know, mindful of that. You know, get involved in campaigns. You know, letter writing, lobbying your MPs or MLAs. You know, get active in these campaigns. You know, get litigious. I encourage you to get litigious. You know, there are a number of lawyers. You know, myself, Nathan, and others who are very committed to these causes and are, you know, prepared to work pro bono, particularly at the end of the day. Often we get paid anyway, so there's no significant financial loss. You may want to consider citizens arrest, but maybe lower it. Anyway, hopefully there's some optimism there and a few ideas for you. And I guess at this point, we'll open for questions, but the story on the photograph taken by Doug. Doug and I had heard about a program through the University of Calgary, and it was a Mount Everest warm-up, essentially. So the team that was going to Everest was going to scale Pico de Orizaba, which is the third highest peak in North America in Mexico, 18,800 feet. So we went down and we weren't that well organized, to be honest. We found our way to base camp, which was a bit of a challenge, and we acclimatized for a couple of days, and then we started the ascent very early in the morning, and it was a nice climb, and it's a little unnerving, you know, all of the crosses in the ice where people had died, and all the crevasses. And we get close to the top, and our two team leaders, so one of them came down with cerebral edema, or pulmonary edema. And eventually we had to belay him off the mountain. He was no good. The other leader said, I'd like to help, but I'm presently having an out-of-body experience. So it was an interesting time.
Here.
I don't know when that was, like 83, maybe 83.
No, it could have been not together earlier. We were together in 83 and you weren't going on that.
And we some of us made it to the top. We took this picture. So,
Even how the body.
even I don't know. Now,
It's not your body.
I can't say I've had a long career in mountain climbing, but you know, I'm kind of proud of that achievement. My other attempt was on Mount Athabasca, which is on the ice fields. And we ended up winning a free pass to the introduction to ice climbing through the Athabasca School. Well, this can't be too serious an introduction. Well, my first clue when I got there, everyone else was half my age. The first couple of days we're out on the ice and that was fine. And then we got more serious and we're dropping people into crevasses and pulling them out. That got a little more serious. And anyway, we started off and attempted to climb to Mount Athabasca, which is Alberta's highest peak. And we got almost to the top. And the team leaders recognized that it really, the conditions weren't safe. We shouldn't be there. So that was a relief to me because it was quite challenging. So that's great. We're going back. But no, if we can't do Athabasca, let's do Boundary Peak, which is the peak right beside it here. Boundary Peak. And I managed to get up, but just barely. Anyway, that's the story on Peak. So any other questions then? Yeah.
Yeah, really enjoyed those rounds in Bragg Creek and with spray, like, can you just give us a little overview about sort of citizens groups there now and, you know, what some of maybe the current challenges you see there?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Bragg Creek's a small community. The hamlet itself is only 450 people, but we have three active organizations. One is the Trails Group, which has an environmental committee and is quite active, and they're actively negotiating with West Fraser. And I think the proposal for this round from West Fraser is going to be dramatically different from what we've seen in the past. So that's a positive. So there's the Trails Group. There's also a group called Bragg Creek Wild. And they're involved in the protection of wildlife, dealing with roadkill and that sort of thing. They have Maureen Harper is one of their patrons. So they're quite active. And then the Bragg Creek Environmental Coalition is involved as well. So you have three pretty active organizations within a small community. The back.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much work you've done on gravel mines and trying to site them or trying to keep them away from water bodies. And, you know, and I'm thinking in particular right now along the Bow River in Rockview County, west of Hawthorne, we've got a huge swath of land there where they're mining the gravel, some of it below the water at the groundwater level. Burn Cone, and then by Big Oak Creek as well. There's a couple of gravel mines operating. There's another 4 that are in the lineup. But you know, you're mentioning that the cost of litigation. It doesn't have to cost you anything, but it seems that you have to. I'm not directly involved, but it seems that you have to, really gear up by having your subject matter specialists, engineers, hydrogeologists, but then also like you mentioned, the only thing they respect is a good lawsuit, and I don't know if you have any words of wisdom or encouragement for some of the people that are heavily involved in this, just people that live in the area that are spending all of their time, trying to find a way to at least get better conditions placed on the gravel mines, that are coming in. Conditions of having monitoring, evaluation, reporting, third party reviews and what have you. And it's a mess, it seems to me.
Yeah, no, I know that, that Big Hill situation is a real challenge, you know, real disappointment in terms of the regulators. We're currently involved in a water-related issue in, near Ghost Lake. And we're in front of the Environmental Appeal Board on that. You know, we're cautiously optimistic we may get a decent decision out of them. The panel itself seemed quite objective on their approach. So we'll see how that goes, but you know, it certainly can be a challenge. I mean, there's some intervenor funding that's available even for experts in certain situations. So that's an option potentially. Yeah.
Clint, why do you think the governments consistently just ignore the value of natural capital? Why is that?
I think they're just driven by various economic interests. You know, they respond to lobbyists. I mean, in terms of the coal lobby, I mean, does that make any sense at all? It doesn't. But you know, you have these high-priced lobbyists that are able to get the ear of government.
Pretty much my question, we've been to many different governments, we had relationships with former conservative parties and New Democrats. All of them are difficult to work with, but some are easier than others. Do you have any thoughts on where we are now?
Trouble in River City. I mean, it's just one thing after another. I mean, you know, it's release of the trapping regulations. It's just anything different. You know, I think there's some port challenges that may have some success. I think that's, in terms of this administration, that's probably what it is.
That come mostly from First Nations. Like, where do you see the real push going forward and the leverage, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, you know, the First Nations issue is an interesting one. You know, we're working on this water issue in Ghost Lake in concert with the Stony Band. But it's the same band that took position in the coal hearings that coal mining was a traditional use of First Nations, you know, so I couldn't quite figure that one out. But you know, there certainly is, you know, significant interest and funding within the First Nations community. I mean, we had good success in dealing with Fort McMurray Band. The bands that I think are perhaps, you know, best suited are smaller bands with a very tight administration, you know, because you know they can get things done. So you know, it was interesting with the Fort McMurray Band. You know, our first meeting with them, I said, "Can you send me the list of chief and counsel, the names of the chief and counsel we're going to be working with?" And I get the list, and there were half a dozen of them. Every one of them had the same last name, and they got along. And that was quite effective, you know, in terms of pushing them. So, but yeah, I mean, we work. I mean, Doug Ray's a good friend of AWA. He's actively involved in First Nations issues with the Stonys, and there's certainly opportunities there with the Métis. I don't know if you follow the Métis. It's messy. It's messy. Yeah, it's messy.
Side note, we were awarded Friends of the Old Man River double costs in the Supreme Court because of Alberta's intentions and obstruction along the way. So
There you go.
sometimes you even do better
Yeah.
in some of those things.
That's right.
And you set precedents.
Yeah. Philip, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Clint. So you encourage litigation and you've had successful litigation, but sometimes it feels like litigation is like reactionary in a way, like you have to wait for harm to occur to then go through the process. Do you see any opportunity to use the law in a way that's like proactive or like before harm occurs? Like, are there opportunities to use it that way?
Yeah, I mean, there's injunctive relief, and on Bar C, we were proactive to prevent the logging, and you know, we were successful in getting multiple injunctions. So that's certainly a possibility. Okay, anyone else? Nathan?
I'm actually, how did you, throughout the Spray Lakes saga, at what point did you actually become involved with AWA and join the board? I don't know your story about how you came to join the organization and become so
It
involved.
was, yeah, I mean, it was about 50 years ago, so.
You're hazy on the detail.
Oh. And, you know, I remember, the AWA had a booth at the Banff Film Fest. Here, this looks like an interesting organization. And you know, having worked prolifically with other environmental organizations, and you know, this is where my heart is, that's for sure.
And who was first, you or Gail?
Where you? Yeah, I created, you know, like about 25.
Maybe 50.
Yes.
Are there any current issues with respect to the sale of crown lands?
You know, others may know better, and I don't hear a lot about that. I mean, you know, there's still continuing sales, I think, in the East region of ranch land. I think the thing of concern is this new proposal to, you know, to open up crown lands to resort development. You know, who knows where that's going? That's certainly a concern. And I don't know if a number of you probably completed the nature survey recently, and you could see the bias there. I mean, the bias was, you know, for access. You know, they were going to make, you know, I think this administration is intent on opening up all crown lands to everybody, whether that's, you know, through roads or, you know, ATV use or whatever. So that's something to be mindful of. Yeah.
A lighter question. So it seems like your stories from when you're on the river, on the mountain, storming a blockade with a friend, you're all in. So I was just wondering, were there ever any costumes or musicians you brought to Spray Lakes when you were going against them in these rounds? Or did you save those for just the fun canoe story?
Yeah, no, just for the fun of it.
So you can see, you were all in there and you were all in the rounds. You have to go 9 rounds.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious, in the case of a survey, government survey that was concluded this summer on the development of renewable energy in southern Alberta in particular. It was a public survey. It closed after 3 weeks or so. The idea was to find out how landowners, private landowners, view the development of renewable energy, wind, solar. The survey results were never released, and even though there was an access to information request made, the return of the information was so severely blacked out, you couldn't tell, and the results themselves were not released. Is there any mitigation one can bring forward? Because the access to information is a public process. It uses a law, but it doesn't. There's an end to it. You cannot re-ask the same question unless you are a lawyer, perhaps. So how would this, is there any use in engaging a lawyer, and who should be engaging a lawyer?
I mean, that's an interesting issue. I think the AWA has had success on the FOIP front. Our past privacy commissioner was quite proactive in ensuring that people got the information that they asked for. I don't know what the experience is now in terms of the new privacy commissioner. Maybe not as good, but you know, there's an appeal process to the commission and beyond. So it's, I mean, we hear that all the time. I mean, you know, the return is completely redacted and useless. So, but if you keep pushing, you can have some success.
Yeah, you just have to keep pushing and keep pushing.
Yeah.
This is actually regarding the FOIP. So everyone actually should know right now that they put in Bill 34, which is I guess kind of a renewal to the Freedom of Information Act, where they're trying to make it essentially more difficult to get access to information that we should be available to the public. So it's a bill right now, so this would be a great time to speak up to your MLA and call them and say, we do not like the amendments to the FOIP Act. One of them, the amendment is essentially that they could reserve the right to not release information that's just background information, which makes zero sense in my opinion. So it's unfortunate because the FOIP process, if anyone's been through it, is rigorous and hard for irrigation data right now. We're waiting on like 3 years, I think, to get it. And we don't want to make our Freedom of Information Act any more restrictive. So this would be a great time to say, pull your MLA and say, I do not like Bill 34. This is a bad bill. Yeah, anyways, that's my FOIP information right now.
Sounds like a letter or another article for them.
It is an article. I mean, okay,
I mean, Alberta has the worst record in Canada in terms of FOIP responses. And, you know, it's interesting because one of the apparent interests of the current administration is freedom of speech. So I don't know if you can use that argument in dealing with, I mean, if there should be freedom of speech and there should be freedom of information.
You want to take it on?
Yeah.
Well, hurry up.
Yeah, one of the things we're looking at, I don't know if you've seen these horrible ads, you know, dealing with the emissions cap. And what's the terminology, something we.
Scrap the cap.
Scrap the cap, and you know, the emissions cap's gonna take food off our table, and we're all, you know, headed for starvation, that sort of thing. And, you know, and this is something we're looking at. I mean, there's you know, honesty in advertising. There are provisions, there are, you know, a number of provisions out there in terms of regulation that you can take advantage of. And we've had success in the past in terms of dealing with the governing body, with the CRTC, and they've stepped in and forced, you know, whatever media to make changes. But yeah, maybe on FOIP, there's a connection there between freedom of speech and freedom of information.
Speaking of ads, I don't know if you've seen the AFPA ads where they have these furry little creatures and they're talking about how great the AFPA is and the forest management plans are going to be 200 years now.
Wow.
And yeah, I'm just wondering what you thought about it.
I haven't seen that.
It's like multi-generation forestry plans. And they're pushing it in a way that's very like greenwashing with these cute little forest creatures.
Love baby forests.
Yeah.
It's that same campaign. Yeah, they used to love baby forests. Yeah, the one that I saw was wise beyond our years. We're promised for the next 200 years for our forest.
Great.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not familiar with the, the greenwashing restrictions, but it'd be something to look at, before they disappear in the short.
Great, talk, so thank you, and we appreciate, I know I do it from the bottom of my heart, how it works. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, here. Even though I'm stellar and I get that I want to. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone coming. These awards are really important, for us as an organization, but also to recognize the people that really truly deserve, that recognition and don't always get it. So, thank you, Clint, again, for all your 50 years of work and everything you do. I also want to thank the awards committee, who makes the decisions and does all the work behind the scenes to bring this event forward for AWA. So chaired by Nathan Schmidt, and had previously been chaired for many years by Clint Wallace, who still sits on the committee, Jim Campbell and Amy Tucker. So thank you to the four of you for all the work you do. Amy is our outreach and communications specialist, and she does all of the sort of heavy lifting on the event planning. So thank you, Amy. Our volunteers tonight, so Aisha Sheikh, Heather Crone, Sana, Samorodi, should I say that right? Jerry Frost, and all of our staff that helped set up and take down, etc. So thank you. And one last thank you to 88 Brewing Company, who donated all the beer for our event tonight. So thank you. We have some other events coming up, so I just want to highlight that we have a group of students coming from St. Mary's University. They're fourth year biology students, and they're coming to do some presentations with AWA on the 19th. Correct? 19th? And then we have the Alberta Grazing Leaseholders Association chair is coming to give a presentation on grazing leases. So I think that's really important for public access and understanding their perspective on stewarding the land. We have also decided that we're going to have a Christmas fair this year. And so we have a market with a bunch of local artists and craft people who are going to come, and that's on December 7th. But I would say just check our website as always. AWA is super busy. We have all kinds of events, and we hope to see you in one of them before the holidays. But if I don't see you again before the holidays, may everyone have a blessed and safe and wonderful holiday season. So thank you for coming tonight. It's still, they're chat and